Chapter 19. Nothing but aggravation. Merlin. It has taken me a long while and I know this is cutting it close to the deadline you requested, but I have finally finished the testant phase and the stone you requested is complete. Forgive me for saying this about my own work, but it is perhaps a true work of art. It will not fail, and it has all the properties you requested. The other stone you requested is not finished yet, but hopefully I can finish it by the end of the year. If I can be of further assistance, please let me know. You have my deepest respect, and I thank you for the honor and privilege of working on these two projects with you. Your friend, Nicholas Flamel. Merlin sighed with relief and opened the small box that had accompanied the letter. He pulled out a very small yellow stone that was about the size of a green pea, and held the stone up to inspect it. Then he smiled. Salazar, he said to himself as he continued to gaze at it. I know that I don't get involved with the wizarding world anymore because I don't like the direction it has gone, but sometimes it never hurts to help out a friend, and you, my good man, will need more help than you realize before all of this is over. There is a reason why I ask for an unbreakable vow from all my friends to not speak of me still being alive, and I can guarantee that you are in for a pleasant shock. Merlin chuckled quietly and placed the stone back in the box. Then he turned to a bird sitting on a perch to his right. Please see that this gets to the right person. The bird nodded knowingly, and flew out the window. The platform at King's Cross wasn't very crowded when Salazar arrived, so he was able to find an empty compartment and get his trunk situated with no problems. He spelled the doors shut so that no one else would take it, then he headed back onto the platform. He stood by the barrier and waited for the children to arrive. He greeted Hermione and met her parents, and shortly after, he met Neville and his gram, and then Blaise and his mum. However, it was almost right at 11 and the train was about to depart when the Weasleys came hurrying through the barrier. Ah! The wayward orphan returns. Harrikins, my old chap, how are you this fine summer day? Fred exclaimed, bowing low as he and George caught sight of him. Hello Fred, George. Salazar said with a chuckle. How are you? Very well my good man. George said, also bowing. Salazar glared at them. If you two don't stop talking like that, I'll bite you. Nora cried suddenly, as she poked her head out of Salazar's robe sleeve. Hello minions. The twins grinned at her, and George held out his hand. Nora slithered out of the robe sleeve and curled around George's arm. Harrikins, Percy here has some news that he has been wanting to brag about since he got his Hogwarts letter this summer. Here Percy, you tell him. Fred laughed as he steered Salazar over to his red-faced brother. Percy smiled and shuffled his feet slightly, but then looked up at Salazar and grinned. I got 12. He happily cried out. Salazar's face lit up in honest delight. Percy, that is wonderful. Congratulations. With those results you can pretty much get any job at the ministry you want. I really am happy for you. Percy beamed, but blushed an even deeper shade of red. Thanks Harry. You always encouraged me to study, so I wanted to tell you. Well, as I said, that is wonderful and I am very happy for you. Thanks. Percy said, but then he looked over Salazar's shoulder and smiled. I have to go, but I'll see you at school. There is someone waiting for me. All right. I'll see you later, Salazar said with a chuckle as Percy hurried off. Then he turned to Fred and George, who were standing next to Molly. Salazar stiffened slightly, but he managed a small smile. Mrs. Weasley, he said with a polite nod. Harry, I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for how I acted last year. I realize that I was very much in the wrong, and I hope you will forgive me. Fred and George told me that they got in contact with you a few days ago, and that they told you all about what happened. Yes they did, Salazar said with a nod. I'm willing to put the past behind us and start over. Very good, she said with a relieved sigh. I do want to invite you for Christmas if you can come, and also, I want to let you know you are welcome to stay with us next summer if Dumbledore hasn't made other arrangements." Salazar internally scowled at the mention of Albus, but he didn't let it show on his face. Instead he smiled. "Thank you very much. I'd like that." "You're welcome, dear," she said, just as the train's whistle blew. "Oh dear. Ginny, let's get you on the train," she exclaimed. Salazar suddenly noticed a girl who had been hiding behind her mother the whole time. The girl was staring at him with wide brown eyes, but he smiled politely at her and nodded. "Hello," he said softly. She let out a squeal, but then took her off running towards the train. Salazar looked at Fred and George curiously, but they rolled their eyes. "Our sister Ginny," George said, as he gave Nora back to Salazar. "We will explain later." Salazar laughed, and they boarded the train just as the final whistle blew. Fred and George went off to find their friends, but Salazar was able to quickly find Hermione, Blaise, and Neville. He showed them where the reserved compartment was, and they all settled in as the train began to pull away from the platform. Salazar was hoping for a quiet ride, but alas, that was not the case. Ron came in yelling about how he was trying to hurt his family and his mum. Ron also was yelling about how Salazar would never be part of his family no matter how hard he tried, and he didn't care if the Muzz Salazar lived with killed him. Ron warned Salazar that he better watch his back as well. Salazar took it all in stride, but stared at the redhead with an amused expression. This only made Ron angrier, and so he started yelling again, until Salazar placed a silencing charm on him. After Ron realized that he couldn't be heard anymore, he finally stomped off, but not before sending a rude gesture at Salazar, who just laughed. He thought no more could happen, but he was wrong. Draco came in a short while after that and started taunting not only him, but Hermione, Blaise, and Neville as well. Salazar was able to get rid of him easily though. He took a page out of the Marauder's book, and colored Draco's hair half gold and half red for Gryffindor. Draco let out a horrified yell and demanded he reverse the spell, but Salazar told him he was stuck like that for a week. After that, Draco stomped off just like Ron had, and Salazar could only laugh at their similarities. When they arrived in Hogsmeade, they took the carriages up to the castle. Salazar was astonished to find out that they had heard of Thestrals to pull the carriages though. He mentioned them, but everyone thought he was crazy. Hermione insisted that nothing was there, but Salazar challenged her to go look up Thestrals in the library before she dismissed their existence completely, and Hermione agreed that she would. When they entered the Great Hall, Salazar let out a small sigh of satisfaction. He had always loved this time of the year, even when he was a professor. The excitement of the soon-to-happen sorting and the nervousness of the upcoming classes always made the castle seem more alive. For tonight he had to sit near the others in his house instead of his usual place at the very end, but Blaise sat right beside him as a buffer from the rest of his housemates. Salazar didn't know why some were still afraid of him. He thought he had proved himself last year, but he realized it wasn't the case. The ones who didn't like him, however, knew enough to keep their distance because of the clashes he and Draco had had last year, but people were funny and Salazar knew he had to watch his back regardless. Nora was delighted to be back at Hogwarts and she sat coiled up on the table in front of Salazar's plate like always, and her, Blaise, and Salazar began a conversation about the upcoming sorting and placed bets on how many new house members they would gain this year. However, all conversation stopped when Minerva led the first years in. Salazar had always loved to watch the sorting, and this year was no different. He was pleased by the number of students that Slytherin gained. There were 4 boys and 3 girls, but 2 of the girls were twins, and Salazar recognized their last name. Caro. More children of Death Eaters, he thought with a sigh. The last person to be sorted was a boy. Unlike the other new students who tried not to sit near him because of Nora, this boy plopped down right across from Salazar and grinned broadly at him. He had very pale skin, dark red hair, and dark green eyes. "Hi," the boy said cheerfully, after Albus made his announcements and the feast began. "You're Harry Potter, aren't you?" "Yes, I am," Salazar answered with a polite nod. "And you're Gordy. Forgive me, what is your last name again?" "Ruffin," the boy replied, as he piled food onto his plate. "Gordy Sigdruffin, but I hate my middle name. I think my parents either misspelled it, or they had had too much to drink when they named me. I don't even think it's a word, to be honest." Salazar chuckled. "I don't think so either. So, are you pleased to be in Slytherin?" "Oh, yes. For the longest time I've wondered what it would be like in Slytherin. I think I'll like it just fine though," Gordy said with a giant smile. "I'm half-blooded by the way, but both of my parents are magical." "Speaker, is this boy our friend too? If so, I think I need a name for him." Salazar laughed. "I don't know, my dear." Gordy stared at him and Nora in awe. "Wow, you're a parcel-mouth. That is so wicked. You're not evil though, are you?" he asked with a sudden bit of apprehension. Salazar chuckled and shook his head. "No, I'm not evil, but people seem to think I am just because I can talk to snakes. This is Nora," he said, motioning towards her. "Oh, well, that's good to know," Gordy said with a relieved smile. "Can I pet her? Will she bite me?" "It depends," Nora said, eyeing him closely, but then she looked at Salazar. "Jolly." Salazar and Blaise looked at her in confusion. "What?" Blaise asked. "Did I understand right? She said jolly." Salazar nodded, but Nora sighed. "His name? Jolly." Blaise started laughing. "Oh, I get it," he said, then he looked at a very confused-looking Gordy. "She just named you Jolly. I'm Blaise Zabini, by the way. Nora calls me Zababy though. Nora calls everyone she's come into contact with a different name. For example, Professor Snape, our head of house, is Bat, and Professor McGonagall is Kitty, though you'll find out why she calls them that on your first day of class," Salazar said with a laugh. Gordy grinned and laughed. "I like it. Thank you, Nora." "You're welcome, and I suppose you can pet me. Though I must warn you, I am the deadliest snake in the world, and I will bite you if I see fit." "She says you're welcome, and that you can pet her," Salazar said with a laugh, and repeated the rest of what Nora said. Gordy laughed, and began petting her. Nora said that he gave good pettings like Bushy did, and decided she liked the boy. Salazar, though, was a little thrown off by Gordy, but then again, he just supposed Gordy was excited to finally be at Hogwarts, and at least Blaise wasn't the only Slytherin not afraid of him anymore. The feast finally ended, and they headed to the common room. Salazar raised an eyebrow and Gordy started laughing loudly and pointing at nearly everything in there, but he had been talking to another first-year boy by the name of Robert at the time. The second-year dorm was the same dorm room they had last year, and Salazar and Blaise immediately reclaimed the same beds. Salazar also wasted no time placing the blood ward back up. He had taken it down at the end of last year, because he didn't trust Albus not to tamper with it. With that done, Salazar changed into his night clothes. It had been a long day and he was happily prepared to welcome sleep. It was not to be though. As soon as he started to drift off, Salazar felt a sudden light weight to the end of his bed. Nora hissed loudly in surprise, and Salazar reached for his wand and lit the tip. At the end of his bed was an elf with graying skin and large green eyes that looked like tennis balls. "Please don't hurt Dobby, sir," the elf said, as he nervously twisted his hands together. Dobby had to make the others go to sleep because Dobby has to warn Mr. Harry Salazar Potter Slytherin, sir. Salazar's eyes widened in alarm. "How do you know who I am?" Dobby lowered his head sadly. Before Dobby was forced to bond with his current family, Dobby was friends with Mitzi and Fripsy. Dobby knows that Mr. Harry Salazar Potter Slytherin sir helped Dobby's friends, and Dobby wants to help Mr. Harry Salazar Potter Slytherin in return. "Who are your masters?" Salazar asked cautiously. Dobby suddenly started to whimper and pull on his ears. Salazar knew right away that the elf had been ordered not to ever reveal that information to anyone, but suddenly Dobby stopped and smiled. Dobby was summoned by young master tonight. He told Dobby to fix his hair. Dobby had no choice, and had to get rid of the red and gold. It took Salazar a moment, but then he understood. Dobby was owned by the Malfoys, and if they were still treating their elves like crap, it was no wonder why this elf was standing on his bed talking to him. "Aren't loopholes a wonderful thing?" Salazar said, as he smiled knowingly at the elf. Dobby grinned at him. "Yes, sir. Dobby likes and uses loopholes a lot. Masters don't pay attention to what they say, they just order Dobby to do things. Dobby spends lots of time looking for loopholes." Salazar chuckled. "All right, can you tell me what you need to warn me about?" "Dobby cannot say details, sir, and there is a lot he doesn't know, but he can say that there is a plot to make terrible things happen at Hogwarts, sir. Dobby knows you can help stop them. Dobby doesn't want anyone to get hurt." "Can you tell me who is plotting them?" Salazar asked, but Dobby shook his head no, and began tugging on his ears again. "All right. Don't hurt yourself," he said quickly, and then he thought for a moment. "Can you tell me if it is your master's idea, or if it is your master's master's idea?" he said, and pointed to his left forearm. Dobby pointed to Salazar's left forearm and shook his head no. "Does the plot, in any way, involve the one who made a tattoo?" Dobby once again tugged on his ears, and whimpered. "Okay, thank you, Dobby. Don't worry about it," Salazar said. "Can you tell me anything else?" Dobby looked at the ceiling in thought, but then he smiled. "Only that history is to repeat itself." "What history and how long ago?" Dobby shook his head. "Dobby cannot say what history, sir, and Dobby does not know how long ago. Dobby is sorry, Mr. Harry Salazar Potter Slytherin. Dobby wishes he could say more." Dobby suddenly began to cry because he couldn't help with anything else, but Salazar was able to quiet him. "It's all right, Dobby. I'll figure it out, and please just call me Harry or Harry Potter. Not the other name, just in case." Dobby nodded and wiped his tears away. "Yes, sir, Mr. Harry Potter, sir, and Dobby promises to never reveal your secret." "All right. You better go before you are found missing. Let me know if you can tell me anything more." "Yes, sir, Mr. Harry Potter, sir. Dobby will do that," he said happily, and then he operated away. Salazar laid back down and began to think. If Lucius was plotting something then Severus might know about, but the one thing Salazar didn't understand was, if Lucius thought that Salazar was Voldemort, then what was Lucius trying to do? Dobby's lack of answering and tugging on his ears told Salazar that it had something to do with Voldemort, but what was it? Salazar didn't know, but he hoped Severus might. It was just after sunrise when Salazar got up the next day. He knew no one else would be up yet, and he was hoping to catch Severus to tell him all that happened with Dobby and ask him some questions. He knew Severus would have told him something by now if he knew exactly what was going on. But perhaps Lucius had said something offhand to the young man and maybe he didn't see it for what it was. Salazar was hoping that was the case, and if so, hopefully he could put a few more clues together. He was just coming down the stairs and was exiting the door that led to the common room when a bright flash of white light caught him off guard. Salazar was momentarily blinded, and he stumbled backward and landed hard on the stairs he had just stepped off of. Then he heard someone gasp loudly, then start laughing. "Harry! I'm so sorry!" a voice cried, as Salazar felt someone help him to his feet. "Are you okay?" "Why yes, I think so." "Gordy?" Salazar asked, as his vision started to clear up somewhat. "Yeah, it's me. I'm so sorry." "What are you doing?" "Well, I couldn't sleep so I got up and started exploring. Then I went into the Great Hall, and I saw this other kid. His name is Colin Creevy and he is a Gryffindor Mole-born, but I don't care about blood status. Anyway, he was taking pictures with this thing, so I asked him about it. He told me that it was a camera and showed me how to work it. He wanted to take a bunch of pictures of different things and people. I told him that I'd take pictures of our common room, so here I am. He also asked me if I had met you yet, and I told him I had. He was real excited and said that he had read all about you. I have too, by the way, and anyway, he asked if I could get a picture of you, so I told him I'd try, but I didn't mean to take one of you just now though. I was trying to get that snake statue. Salazar blinked owlishly at the boy. It was too early in the morning for all this. Speaker? Are you all right? You have gone unusually quiet. Nora asked, poking her head out of his sleeve. Salazar shook his head to clear it. Yes, my dear, I'm all right. Oh hey. Nora is here. Hey, can I get a picture of both of you standing beside that statue? I think Colin will like that. Gordy exclaimed. Speaker, I want my picture taken, she said, as she slithered out the sleeve and up his arm. Make sure you hold me up so it can be a good one. I just shed my skin so my scales are a nice shiny black. Salazar sighed and rubbed his eyes. All right. I'll take two if it's okay. One for me and one for Colin. It would be neat to have a photo of Harry Potter, Gordy said, as Salazar went to stand beside the statue. Tell him to take 3. I want one, so that I can admire my scales, Nora said, turning to look at Salazar, who had sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Nora asks that you take 3 so she can have 1, he said. He didn't have time for this. He needed to talk to Severus, but he also didn't want to be rude to the boy, even if Gordy was being a bit forward. Gordy grinned and agreed, then he snapped off the pictures. Salazar then excused himself, but Gordy decided to follow him out of the common room. Are you going to breakfast? Is it going to start soon? I'm hungry. Oh hey, I heard a rumor that there are shortcuts. Do you know any? Salazar glared at the boy that was quickly trying his patience, but he sighed and nodded. Yes, if you go to the picture of Salazar Slytherin and say Mortal Dread it will open. The shortcut leads right into the entrance hall. Oh wow, really? Wicked! Gordy exclaimed, but then he blushed. Will you come with me? It's a bit scary down here. Salazar sighed. Very well. Maybe when he got Gordy back to the Great Hall, Salazar could finally find Severus. Colin Creevy turned out to be Gordy's Gryffindor twin. They weren't related by any means, but both boys were the same personality-wise. Nora absolutely loved both of them and the attention she got from them. She named Colin Hyper and Colin took a bunch of pictures of just her because she is just so wicked. Nora was posing every which way, and of course, talking to them the whole time, which meant that Salazar had to translate. By the time the boys had finished asking Salazar every single question they could think of, and taking the pictures of Nora, the Great Hall was already filling with students. Salazar sighed because now he would have to wait to talk to Severus. He excused himself from the Gryffindor table where the 3 of them had been sitting, but of course, Gordy followed him back to the Slytherin table. Breakfast was semi-quiet, but only because everyone was eating. Hermione and Neville ate with Blaise and Salazar, but when that happened, Colin decided to come over and eat with Gordy. The rest of Slytherin House kept shooting glares at the Gryffindors, and Salazar could hear grumblings about trash, mudbloods, and blood traitors. It all stopped when Severus swooped down from the head table to pass out schedules. When he got to Salazar, Severus sneered at him and thrust his schedule in his face. Potter, it seems that once again your unwillingness to do as you're told has caused the headmaster to request your presence. As I recall, this time last year you were also called to his office. Keep it up and we could call it a tradition. He spat, then he sneered at everyone sitting around him. Your fan club is not allowed to accompany you, he added, then he swooped away. Salazar suddenly had a thought. You know, Professor, he sneered, and Severus whipped around with a scowl on his face. I don't know what your problem with me is, But ever since I walked through those doors last year you have been nothing but nasty to me. What have I ever done to you? You're arrogant. Severus shouted, making every head in the great hall turn towards them. You're lazy. You think the rules are beneath you. You're just like your father. Don't talk about my father, Salazar yelled. I put up with your bullying of me last year, but I won't this year. Be quiet, you insolent whelp. No, Salazar shouted. Detention, Potter, Severus bellowed. For yelling at a professor, he said with a haughty smirk. Be in my office tonight at 7 sharp, and if you're late, Potter, I'll have you in detention for the rest of the year. He spat. Salazar glared furiously at Severus, but he kept quiet. He had gotten what he wanted. He also knew that Severus knew what he had done, but it was all right. It would get sorted out this evening. Salazar sat back down as Severus moved on to finish passing out schedules. He started looking over his own schedule, but looked up when Hermione spoke. Harry, you just back-talked a teacher. Yeah, well, he's a greasy git. Harry, she gasped. I know he's unpleasant. Unpleasant? Blaise interrupted. Hermione, Snape hates Harry. Blaise is right, Hermione, Neville said. Snape treats Harry worse than he treats Gryffindors. But he's still a teacher. That's what makes it so bad, Gordy suddenly said, making everyone look at him. Professor Snape should not act like that. It's all right, you lot. It'll be fine, but I better go talk to the headmaster. Neville, Hermione, I'll see you in defense later because we have class with you all. Blaise, please save me a seat in charms if you can. Colin, Gordy, don't yell at the professors. Gordy started laughing. Or call them names. That too, Salazar said with a chuckle. I got to go. Bye you all. He added, then he hurried off to Albus's office. Salazar was just about to exit the great hall when a blond man in periwinkle robes intercepted him and began to walk along beside him. He had a large bright smile, and grinned down at Salazar, who glanced briefly at him. Harry Potter, he exclaimed. It's an honor to meet you. Did I just hear Professor Snape say that you have a fan club? You're starting early, I take it. That's good. That's good. He cried happily, without giving Salazar a chance to correct him. I can teach you all about fame and how to manage it. I do, of course, know what I'm talking about. I have. I'm sorry, sir, but who are you? Salazar asked, cutting him off mid-speech. The wizard looked slightly affronted, but he recovered quickly and gave Salazar another bright smile. That's right, you have lived with Muzz your whole life. Well, Harry, I am Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, and I have won Witch Weekly's Best Smile Award numerous times, and I'm also your new defense professor. I see. Salazar replied. Well, it was nice to meet you, but I have to see the headmaster. Oh yes, of course. I'm heading that way myself. Not to see the headmaster, but I think we can take this time to talk. Okay. Salazar said a little unshyly. But I have to say, I don't have a fan club. Those were my friends. Ah yes, that may true young celebrity, but not all friends are fans, and not all fans are friends. You have to be very careful. I can help you to see the difference, seeing as I have plenty of experience myself. They don't care about the famous thing. Ah yes, but they may. Peeves. Leave them alone. Salazar suddenly shouted. They had just rounded the corner onto the 2nd floor, and Salazar caught sight of the poltergeist dropping water balloons on the heads of some first-year Ravenclaws. Peeves suddenly stopped and was about to make a rude comment, until he saw who it was. Lord Slytherinus, how nice to see you this morning, he said in a somewhat sickly sweet voice that was tinged with nervousness. Peevesy was just poking fun at the lost first years. No harm. Just honest fun. Salazar gave him a leveled glare. It looks to me like they are soaking wet. Yes. Peeves drawled. "Away with you, before I summon Baron," Salazar said with warning. Peeves suddenly yelped, tossed the balloons up in the air, and zoomed down the corridor. Salazar thought quickly and drew his wand. "Immobulus!" he cried, and the balloons froze in midair. "Come you lot, so I can set them down." The first years hurried over to them and stood behind Harry, but Lockhart suddenly drew his wand. "Not to worry, Harry. I'll set them down. Reducto!" he cried. Salazar had only a second to conjure a shield before the balloons exploded, but he managed to get it up in time to avoid the water that splashed everywhere. Lockhart, however, wasn't so lucky. He had been standing in front of Salazar and took the full blast of the exploding water balloons, and now the man was standing there soaking wet. Salazar just started at Lockhart. "He's an idiot," he thought, but then he turned to the first years. "If you're looking for the Great Hall, go straight down the corridor and then take a left. The main staircase will be to your immediate right, and you can take that all the way down to the entrance hall." "Thank you. You've been very helpful." "Not at all what I expected from a Slytherin," a girl with long pale blonde hair and a dreamy voice said, as she smiled at him. "You're welcome," Salazar replied. They hurried off, whispering about how the boy who lived had just saved them, but the blonde-haired girl ignored them and continued to gaze around in wonder. Salazar turned back to Lockhart, who was muttering to himself, but then he looked up to find that Salazar was staring at him. "So sorry about that, Harry. Just a little slip of the tongue. Well, I guess I better be off. I need to dry off," he said. Then Lockhart hurried towards the defense classroom. "I don't think I like him, Speaker. He seems like a stupid man." "He is, my dear. Severus was right." "I don't like him," Salazar said, as he slipped down a shortcut to get to the Albus's office. "Good morning, Harry. Come in and have a seat," Albus said cheerfully. "How have you been this morning?" "Between hyper children, idiot professors, and now you. Not so good," Salazar thought bitterly, but then he smiled. "Fine," he answered. "Very good. I wanted to see you this morning to find out how you've been. You disappeared again this past summer, and I'm happy to see that you made it back to us safely. May I ask where you were?" "Traveling," Salazar stated simply. "I see," Albus said with a frown. "May I ask why you didn't stay with the Dursleys?" Salazar glared at him. "They were going to lock me up like some caged animal," he cried. "I wasn't going to put up that, so I left." "Yes, and I noticed you used magic at the Dursley also. Are you aware that you are not allowed to use magic outside of school?" "Yes, sir, but seeing as escaping from the Dursleys was a self-defense of sorts, I thought it was okay." "But it didn't register with the improper use of magic office," Albus stated. "Probably because they recognized it as self-defense as well. I did a lot of reading about that last year, and even more when I left," he replied. Albus frowned at him. "And how did you travel?" "By mole transportation. I summoned the night bus and went to Gringotts. Then I turned some galleons into pounds, and traveled around by mole means." "But you would have been safe at Dursley's. You don't need to be out there alone because it's not safe. Why didn't you just endure?" "Because I endured the Dursleys for 10 years, but I won't any longer. I also didn't appreciate you sending your pet Death Eater to escort me to them," he said, and smirked when Albus looked shocked. "Oh yes, I read and learned a lot over the summer. Professor Snape is a Death Eater. Now I know why he hates me." "Was a Death Eater, Harry?" "Was. He has turned from that path." "I doubt it. Professor Snape risked a lot to serve the light side in the last war." "Spare me the sob story, Professor." "His actions towards me, and his clear favoritism towards Malfoy and his lot, tell me all that I need to know." "You're wrong about that, Harry." "That's because you always think you're right," Salazar said. He knew, of course, that Albus was right, but for the sake of arguing he stuck with his view on the matter. Albus glared at him, but then he sighed. I see that we are going to have to agree to disagree on that subject. I believe you are correct, Salazar replied. From what I've been reading, and from my observations, Death Eaters won't change their dot to 2. He said with a slight smirk. Albus glared at him again, but then he smiled. You're a very bright boy, Harry, but there is a lot you don't know. Then why don't you fill in the blanks? Salazar asked. Because I don't think you're ready for it because you're too young. Salazar laughed. Again, you think you're right. I may be young, Professor, but I can handle it. I don't think so, but we are done here. I believe you have a charms class to attend. Yes, sir, Salazar said, then he immediately stood up and left. He had given Albus the chance to tell him about the prophecy, but clearly the man wasn't going to. If Albus really wanted Harry to be prepared to face Voldemort, wouldn't he have taken the opportunity? Salazar just had to laugh, but he also wondered what other things Albus was going to keep from him, and why he wanted Harry to remain ignorant. The excuse of "you are too young to handle it" seemed flimsy after all the things Harry had went through last year. Salazar just chuckled. It is fine, let Albus play his games. He doesn't have to know that I am already 15 steps ahead of him, Salazar thought. Then he laughed loudly.
Hey guys, what's going on? Thank you so much for watching today's episode. If you guys want to watch more like it, please subscribe to my channel and become part of the video game fanfiction plot. And please leave a comment down below and hit that like button. If you guys have any suggestions on any stories you guys want me to read, don't hesitate. They're always welcome here in the video game fanfic plot. That also goes for video games. Until next time, goodbye!